generations to come.
It's Belmont Stakes Week, and that means it's time for another edition of the TDN Writers Room. Hi, my name is Bill Finley. I'm a correspondent for the Thoroughbred Daily News. Also co-host the Down the Stretch Show with Dave Johnson at SiriusXM Radio on Saturday mornings. Tune us in.
And I'm TD Thornton, stablemate of Bill's at Thoroughbred Daily News, speaking to you from a little north of Boston today.
Well, absolutely delighted to be able to put the name to the face now, Tim. Happy to have you here. I'm Zoe Cadman with First Racing. Minus Doodle in the background. He's already been to the track, got his sausage, and put himself back to bed like a good boy.
And I want to remind you that the TDN Writers Room podcast is brought to you by Keeneland. All right, guys, let's get right into it. The Belmont Stakes, very interesting race. Not a perfect Triple Crown season. We'd like to see more horses participate in all the races, but nonetheless, you've got a field of 9 going to line up at Big Sandy on Saturday. And I'm going down this race, and I've eliminated everybody. I've got a knock on every major horse in the race. So I'm pulling my hair out. I don't know what to do. So let's start with the number one story, I think, in this race is Forte. Obviously, his credentials are impeccable. A 2-year-old champion, wins the Breeders' Cup, wins the Florida Derby. But couple issues with him, the 10-week layoff, the missing the Derby. My take on him, I didn't like him in the Derby. How can I pick him in the Belmont considering all these, kind of hurdles in his way? TD, what do you think?
He does resonate to me as kind of a headline horse. We've only seen him twice since the Breeders' Cup, once at a mile and a 16th in the Fountain of Youth, where he was in complete control of the race, had the field at his mercy, and it was not a top-notch field. He came back in the Florida Derby. He kind of had one of those snatched victory from the jaws of defeat type of races where he looked beaten on the far turn. He reeled in Mage. At that time, we didn't know where Mage was at in the pecking order. We've now seen that he's come back to win the Kentucky Derby. So that kind of solidified Forte's status. But, he really resonates to me as a vulnerable favorite in the Belmont for the reason you mentioned, 10-week layoff, 12 furlongs, never been that far. And that's quite a big gap time-wise between starts. We know he's had a foot issue in between that he's reportedly recovered from. But a tough horse, I think, to take at low odds in that spot.
Guys, I think you guys are crazy. I mean, I don't know why you're worried about a 10-week layoff. What's wrong with you? We all loved him in the Fountain of Youth Stakes, and that was a layoff since November the 4th, when he took down the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, to the 4th of March. That was a longer layoff. There was more time between races. Now, I'm not sold that he is a 1.5 mile horse, hence I'm not putting him on top. Do I like him more than I liked him going into the Kentucky Derby? Yes, for sure I do, because I was worried that gutting in the Florida Derby took too much out of him. So the 10 weeks for me is perfect. Trainer Todd Pletcher, 23% off a layoff of more than 180 days. If you're worried about the 10-week layoff and not the fact that he's bred to go 1.5 miles, I think you're absolutely crazy. Forte is going to be the best version of Forte that we've seen this year going into this race. Now, is he a 1.5 mile horse? I'm not sure. That is the niggling instinct in the back of my mind.
Zoe, one thing I will definitely agree with you. I don't think Todd Pletcher would be trying this if he wasn't very confident that he could pull it off. So I'm not worried about that. But I didn't like his Florida Derby. And I threw him out in the Kentucky Derby. And I'm thinking, well, if I throw him out in the Kentucky Derby, how can I pick him now in the Belmont Stakes? So that's just one more, thought about him. Okay, so when we're on the subject of Pletcher, let's stick with Tapit Trice in here. And this is a horse, every time he runs this year, I'm wrong about him. I hated his Tampa Bay Derby, so he comes back and wins the Bluegrass. I love this Bluegrass, so he comes back. I pick him in the Kentucky Derby. And I thought, to be honest, I think his Kentucky Derby stunk. He had no excuse that day. Everybody was coming from all the horses that were at the finish line were horses that came from off the pace. He was well back early. He had no excuses, and he just didn't fire. He didn't have any gas in his tank in the stretch. So the same sort of thing. How can I take him now coming off a race that I really wasn't impressed with? Now, having said that, you've obviously got to take other factors into account. The Tapits, how well they've done in the Belmont in the last 8 years. And this pattern with Pletcher, has had other horses that have not run exceptionally well in the Kentucky Derby. Then he passes the Preakness and wins the Belmont. But he's going to be either second or third choice. I can't go with him off a race in the Kentucky Derby that I thought was pretty unimpressive.
I have a little bit of a different opinion on Tapit Trice here. I think he's a tailor-made horse for Belmont Park and perhaps a mile and a half. We've written ad nauseum all winter and spring long about how he just puts himself out of the race at the start. The visual of having to be scrubbed on for run, leaving the starting gate in the Tampa Bay Derby, again in the Bluegrass at Keeneland. However, he does unleash this monster move from 6 furlongs out, which when I look at the contenders in the Triple Crown Series, I like to see when I'm assessing their prep races where they start their runs. And in both the Bluegrass and the Derby, despite kind of putting himself behind the 8 ball, he did manage to start cranking up 6 furlongs out. I haven't seen any other horse be able to do put together that type of sustained run. Hasn't always resulted in a victory for Tapit Trice. In the Derby, he had a couple of momentum stops. That also seems to be par for the course for him. He's a big, burly gray. It takes him a while to unwind. And he did respond to rousing on the far turn. I think when he got into the stretch, Luis Saez, when he hit the 8th pole and it was obvious he wasn't going to make a dent into the top 4, he saved Tapit Trice for another day. Presumably Saturday is that day in the Belmont Stakes. So I think it's, Tapit Trice moves up a little bit. To me, he skipped the Preakness. He's coming in relatively fresh for the Belmont, but there is a now or never element to what he has to produce on Saturday.
I love him. And I have not said that once about Tapit Trice. I have never said that I love him. He's got the perfect style for the Belmont. Watching him train over Big Sandy, he's a big, sturdy, galloping son of Tapit out of a Dunkirk mare. He just plows through the ground there at Belmont. He makes his move at the 6 furlong pole. The 6 furlong pole on Big Sandy is at the half-mile pole, so he's got ample time. He's not one of those horses who's going to move too early. We've seen it time and time again. Real Quiet just still plays over and over and over again in my head. And Smarty Jones moving too early. This is a horse that can sustain a long run. So if he moves at the 3/4 pole, at the half-mile pole, I think he's going to be absolutely fine. Traffic is not going to be a problem with this smaller field, and they get strung out in the running of the Belmont Stakes. Luis Saez is not going to be a problem. Todd Pletcher's not going to be a problem. The post position's not going to be a problem. I really like Tapit Trice, and I love the way that he is trained over the track there at Belmont. So I am most definitely using him. Along, guys, with Angel of Empire, who gets the blinkers on. Now, he's always worked in the morning with the blinkers on with Flavien Prat. After the Derby, Flavien came back to Brad Cox and said, we need to put them on in the afternoon. So while he's not classically bred by Classic Empire to get the distance, I think we're going to see a renewed Angel of Empire, more like the one we've seen in the morning as opposed to the grinding sort we've seen in the afternoon. I'm boxing the pair of them.
All right, Angel of Empire is the Pennsylvania bred in there, and he's going to be my pick in here. But again, like I can't muster a lot of enthusiasm for anybody in this race. He ran really well in the Kentucky Derby, no doubt about it. I mean, he was third, beaten only a length and a half, but he too had a perfect trip. Absolutely, it was a very good ride by Flavien Prat, and he had no excuse not to win that day. Again, with the way the pace meltdown was and how everybody coming from the back of the pack was moving up. But having said that, it was not anything close to a bad race. As a matter of fact, he did what I think Tapit Trice should have done in the Kentucky Derby, which was really show us something in the stretch run where he was making up ground. Another jump or two, he would have been second. I don't think he was going to get by Mage at any time soon, but he made a nice run. Obviously, Brad Cox is an asset. And the blinkers on thing is very interesting. I would imagine that would help him be a little bit closer to the pace, which I think is going to be something to his advantage in the Belmont. So for what it's worth, he's my pick.
I'm going to go in a different direction here. The horse we haven't talked about yet, the potential pacemaker, National Treasure. Now, he comes off of a win in the Preakness Stakes, in which everybody after the race was talking about how Johnny Velasquez put the field to sleep on the front end. They went very slow fractions for up to the 3/4 time, but look at the final 3/16 of that race. He finished up in a prolonged stretch battle with Blazing Sevens in 18.05 seconds. And I went back through the Equibase charts the other night. You can't find a faster closing 3/16 in the Preakness in all of the Equibase charts that are listed. That goes back to 1991. Doing a little bit further digging, I found out that what is believed to be the record is 18 seconds flat, and that was set by Summer Squall in the 1990 Preakness when he was, I believe, just 2 ticks off the track record. That's an impressive number to put up. He walked them early. He was engaged in a duel. He clearly had the upper hand over Blazing Sevens, and I believe National Treasure was even emboldened by some of the bumping and brushing that went on through the lane in that race. Bob Baffert said after the race it did not take too much out of him, apparently, and he's coming back as a fresh horse. Now, do you say that he got lucky? He caught a soft field in the Preakness. Do you actually believe the clocking of 18.05 seconds for that final 3/16? I haven't heard anybody dispute it. It seems a little unbelievable, but I can't present any evidence to dispute it. But if that's a real number, that is an exceptionally fast time. I don't think he needs the lead to win in the Belmont Stakes. John Velasquez riding on his home court, so to speak, he might let some of the other long shot speedballs go in that race, sit a stalking trip. National Treasure has been capable of stalking in the past. I think he will be part of the pace, doesn't necessarily have to have the lead to win. And I think he's kind of under the radar here at 5-1.
Yeah, TD, I largely agree with you there. I do think that he's got a chance in this race. But, from a handicapping standpoint, I can't pick a horse back off a perfect trip like he had in the Preakness. And I don't think he'll actually get the lead here. I think this horse, NYRA would be my guess. Last time out, they went to the front in an allowance race at Gulfstream, 23-45-1, and it really worked out well for them. So if I'm the connections, the horse has no chance, but you look at him and think, if we're going to pull off the biggest upset and one of the biggest upsets in Triple Crown history in recent years, how are we going to do it? It's only going to be on the front end. So I'm with you, but he got everything his own way. I know he was game in the Preakness in the stretch. I know all the things you said about his his fractional times finishing up, but that just walking on the lead in there, that's not going to happen again. Zoe, your take on National Treasure?
Oh, I think that Randy grew some hair and came back as TD Thornton. Way to go down the rabbit hole there, TD. I love that, the 18 seconds. So we've got some competition for Randy here with rabbit holes. But yeah, National Treasure, I don't think anyone's going to challenge Bob Baffert and Johnny V for the lead. I really don't. He's been training like a bear. He's a fresh horse. Even off the win, he's been training lights out there at Belmont Park. And a lot of people coming in nowadays that have got speed don't want to challenge Bob on the lead if they're intent on getting the lead. So I think they're probably just going to play out the break. National Treasure, Bob knows how to win a Belmont. We all know that. We'll just have to see if he's good enough. I've got one more to throw at you. We've seen women win the Belmont as a jockey. Julie Crone, I think it's her 30th year anniversary that she won the Belmont Stakes. How about Jenna Antonucci and Arcangelo? Won the local prep, the Peter Pan, by a head. He's a lightly raced son of Arrogate, bred to run all day. He's been training very well, went out for a routine 2-minute lick and actually wound up working 5/8 and 102. Handles the track very nicely indeed. It's going to be a long shot. He's lightly raced, but I'm going to use him in my exotics. Arcangelo for Jenna Antonucci, a very, very good trainer indeed.
All right, TD, who's your live semi-long shot then?
Well, I think at 5-1, I'm going to go with National Treasure. I mean, the 3 horses ranked ahead of
5-1. No way.
In the morning line, the horses ranked ahead of him are all deep closers. I mean, Forte, one of the things that Irad Ortiz said after the Florida Derby was he was hustling that horse to try and get up there to beat with the pacemakers on the first turn. And I remember one of his post-race quotes that stuck in my head was, the horse just couldn't get up there. I wanted him placed more forwardly placed, and I had to hustle him. Didn't work, had to back off. So I think Forte, even with the blinkers on, Angel of Empire, is that going to really put him up into the front vanguard? I don't think so. I see a trip where National Treasure stalks off somebody like an Il Miracolo. Forte and Tapit Trice, they're going to be gunning for him. But I think National Treasure is going to get the jump off the turn, and that's where the Belmont Stakes is going to be won this year.
Yeah, I'm sort of on Zoe's same wavelength here. I'm not going to pick Arcangelo, but if you want to throw in a 10, 12 to 1 shot for most of the reasons she said, and they're putting up $50,000 to supplement this horse into the Belmont Stakes, not an original Triple Crown nominee. Certainly bred to go the distance and in good form coming off the Peter Pan win. So any other insights? Have we covered it all, guys?
I think for the Belmont Stakes, yes. I mean, it's a terrific card at Belmont. Hopefully we get into that a little bit later. 6 grade 1s. It's like a mini Breeders' Cup we're having at Belmont this weekend.
Yeah, we'll get into that right after this message. Zoe from Keeneland, what do you have for us?
Yeah, just a reminder that the TDN Writers' Room is brought to you by Keeneland, home of the world's yearling sale. The energy, magic, and momentum of the September yearling sale returns on September the 11th through the 23rd. Learn more at theworldsyearlingsale.com. We'll be right back after this terrific message from Keeneland.
If this place could talk, it would roar. It would say, this is racing. This beating heart in the heart of horse country. Steady and strong beneath the roar. Reminding us why. For the love of the horse. For generations to come.
Speightstown. Munning. Echo Town.
It's Echo Town for Joe Talamo, and Echo Town raced away.
And Echo Town is drawing away in the stretch. Echo Town wins the Alan Turkin Stakes.
A sire line so prolific, it repeats itself. Echo Town.
The TDN Writers' Room is brought to you by Coolmore. American Pharoah had no fewer than 6 winners over the weekend, including window shopping in the Grade 2 Summertime Oaks. Ridden for the second time by Hector Berrios, she more than made up for a disastrous trip in the Santa Anita Oaks. Not sure she could have gotten any more trouble that day, but this time she was stuck between horses for the whole race, and she certainly proved her mettle. The Keeneland graduate is trained by Richard Mandela and owned by Perry and Ramona Bass. How impressive is it to have 6 wins over the weekend? Meanwhile, Ashford's top sire, Uncle Mo, is doing as good as ever this year. His daughter, Super Hoity Toity, got her 4th stakes win this weekend in the Grade 3 Belle Mahone at Woodbine. Uncle Mo now has 5 graded stakes winner on the year. That's 3rd best in all of North America.
Well, it's that time again. First things first at Santa Anita.
It's a Sunday here at Santa Anita Park, and if you can't beat them, you join them. We're going to take them on in the Dragon Boat. Everybody ready?
Yeah, we definitely had some fun this weekend. We had Dragon Boat Racing. Now, if you've never heard of this, it is a team building event. It was actually sponsored by the Diamond 100 Racing Club at Santa Anita. We had heats on the infield, and the broadcast team got together to have a go and face off against the marketing team. Now, I was in the front. I had Michelle Yu behind me, Jessica Pfeiffer behind her, and Peter Lorre bringing up the rear. We set off at a pretty good pace. I was being shoved along by Michelle Yu earlier, and Peter, trying to go one-handed like he was riding a bull, brought up the rear. Now, things got a little tricky in the final 16th of a mile. Peter taking a tumble, bringing down Jessica Pfeiffer, falling on top of her. Michelle Yu trying to keep herself up, shoved me to the ground, and then went on to win it on her own. A really, really fun afternoon of racing. Not only does Santa Anita have horse racing, apparently now we have a Dragon Boat Racing. Do want to remind you that racing will continue this weekend with a 1 o'clock post time on Friday. Stakes action this weekend will be the Santa Margarita Stakes, Honeymoon Stakes, and Cinema Stakes on Sunday. Do want to remind you we have a 1 o'clock post on Saturday, and gates will open at 8 a.m. for Belmont Stakes Day.
And as Zoe mentioned earlier, so much to talk about on the Saturday card at Belmont. 9 graded stakes races, including 6 grade 1s, and they go off, the 6 grade 1s go off all in a row. This is, to me, and I don't think there's much disputing this, next to the Breeders' Cup Saturday, the best card of racing offered anywhere in the United States. So kudos to Belmont Park for putting on quite a show. So why don't we go through start with the grade ones. The 7th is the Ogden Phipps, another rematch between Secret Oath and Clairiere. They've split the decision this year. Clairiere getting the win in the Apple Blossom last time out. Played hard coming off a grade 1 win in the La Troyenne is certainly a major contender. Field of 6, very good race, and the 2 leading fillies in older fillies and mares in training. Clairiere won this race last year. Steve Asmussen has won it 3 of the last 4 years. TD, what do you think?
Yeah, well, Clairiere, when she won it last year, was 9-2 in the wagering, and she's not going to be anywhere close to that this year. She's 6-5 on the morning line, and she probably deserves every penny of it. You have to, I think, start with looking at the top 3 from the La Troyenne here. They're all coming back on Saturday in the Phipps. Played hard, won that race. She had good speed, but was rated. She was keen despite being under a rating hold. Eventually, off the far turn, she pulled in the pacemaker. She had a wall of 5 fillies and mares behind her trying to close the gap, and she held in pretty well. Search results briefly got the lead between calls, played hard, clawed it back, and in the interim, Secret Oath came up and was second, beaten a neck, which has been her result the past couple of races. It is kind of hard to get around Clairiere here. I think just her consistency in terms of the buyer numbers. She's fired at least a 100 number, a little more consistently than some of the others in here. Last time out, she was the victress in the Apple Blossom Stakes. She did win the Phipps last year, as Bill said. I guess if you're looking at multi-race exotics, sure, you have to use her. And if you're playing a straight win, you have to decide if 6-5 is your breaking point or not.
Yeah, it's Clairiere. She's been pointed for this race. She hasn't had one in between. She's fresh coming in. Her last race was on the 15th of April. Secret Oath, I think I mentioned this a while back. Her better races come early in the year because she doesn't get a break after that. She ran her guts out in the La Troyenne last time out. I think she's going to be close. She's certainly going to be part of it late, but I think Clairiere is going to get the best of them. As far as played hard, I think she ran hard. Well, I'd love to see her break 100 by one of these days, but I'm not sure she's quite good enough. I will throw one in there who I think will run a better race, and that is Search Results, purely for the fact that she loves Belmont Park and she'll get the services of Flavien Prat again. But for me, it's going to be Clairiere.
Coming up next is the Woody Stevens. It's a grade 1, 7 furlongs for 3-year-olds. A lot of chalk in this portion of the program. Not in this race. This race is pretty wide open. You've got a field of 10 in here. You've got a field of 13 going in this 7 furlong race. I'm going to go with Fort Bragg in here. Ran last time out in the Pat Day Mile. Very good. Second beaten a neck behind General Jim. And is back in the Bob Baffert barn. No knock on Tim Yaktine. He's done a good job in a difficult situation with some of these Baffert horses. But I just think the mojo of going back in the Baffert barn, who, by the way, is running his first horses in quite some time at Belmont, because remember, they too had instituted a ban against him, though it was shorter than the one at Churchill Downs. So I'm sure Bob is delighted to be back in action Saturday at Belmont Park. But a real wide open race. Arabian Lion is the other Baffert horse in here, coming off a big win in the Sir Barton. I think the question there is going back to the 7 furlongs after running 2 turns a mile and 16th, whether or not that horse will bounce. And then General Jim for Shug McGahee. He's certainly got a chance. TD, what do you think?
Yeah, you have to remember one of Baffert's quotes after winning the Sir Barton, after Arabian Lion wired the field easily at, I believe, 2-5 odds, short field. I think it was a 5-horse field. He said, "I should have run him in the Preakness." Can you imagine, what the pace in the Preakness would have been like with Arabian Lion in there? But that's all conjecture at this point. General Jim, remember last year he started on the turf. Trainer Shug McGahee entered him in the Mucho Macho Man, a 1-turn mile sort of prep race on the Derby Trail for horses who are maybe looking to go longer distances. He was 4th, only beaten a length and a half there. And then Shug kept him at the middle distances, which I think has been a wise move. He's won the Swale Stakes, won the Pat Day on the Derby undercard. It was a relentless, willing close from General Jim. But, Bill, I hope you didn't jinx the horse that I like here, because Fort Bragg is the horse who catches my eye at 5-1. He got first run into some very fast fractions. He twice repulsed bids from the eventual winner, General Jim, in that race. And I like to see that when a horse does that, even if it's in defeat. Sometimes it shows a little more grit and a little more guts in the final 16th or so. I think, as you said, the cutback in distances has helped. They tried him on the Derby Trail, Derby Trail and Derby distance type of races earlier in the season. He was running against horses at 1 mile and a 16th, like Forte. He twice lost a practical move. Fort Bragg at 7 furlongs, one to beat.
I can't get by Arabian Lion. The cutback in distance probably is only going to help him. He hasn't had a really sharp work in the interim, so I think he's ready to rock and roll. So I like him, but another one that I think we've forgotten about is what's wrong with Drew's Gold on the outside. He's undefeated. He's 4 for 4. He's had a local prep over the track, a 98 by a speed figure coming off a short layoff. It's fresh. He's ready. I like him as well. I think he's going to get a good trip from the outside. He's got just enough speed to not lose too much ground on that one turn.
Well, Zoe, your point's well taken. I mean, this is a very good betting race, very wide open. Drew's Gold at 8-1 in the morning line. Okay, we move on now to the Jaipur. This is always an interesting, good race. 6 furlongs on the turf. Caravel. Originally, they were going to go to Royal Ascot with her, last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint winner. And shout out to our friends, the Pennsylvania Breeders. Another very good, outstanding Pennsylvania bred. She's 3-1 in the morning line, and certainly the marquee horse in here. But I'm just wondering, maybe, I know it's splitting hairs, but if 6 furlongs is not exactly what she wants, if she's not more a 5.5 furlong horse, but we'll find out about that. She's obviously in great form right now. I'm going to go with Casa Creed, who won this race last year for Bill Mott, was 4-1 that day, came back in February and ran very well in Saudi Arabia to finish second. This horse fits this race perfectly, won the race in 2021, won it again in 22, going for 3 straight wins, which will be quite a remarkable feat for the 7-year-old by Jimmy Creed. I think he needs pace up front. I think there is definitely enough pace to set it up for him to get his run. So I'm a Casa Creed handicapper, picker guy in the Jaipur. TD?
Yeah, all the major contenders seem to be drawn outside in this big field. It's got 14 with 2 on the AE list. I'm going to go with Big Invasion here at 6-1 for Christophe Clement. This is a horse that won 6 sprints in a row last year on the grass. Last time out on the Derby undercard, he checked off heels pretty hard at the 8th pole and was 7th, but only beaten 4.5 lengths. You know, in these turf sprints, which are usually bonkers for me to try and handicap, it's not my strong suit. But I like to see those horses who maybe have a little hidden form. People will look at that 7th place finish, still being beaten only 4.5 lengths despite having your momentum stopped 200 yards from the wire. It's got to count for something. And at 6-1, I'll take a chance to find out.
I'm used to Randy stealing my thunder, but wasn't expecting TD to do the same thing. Nice pick, TD. I love Big Invasion in here for all of the reasons that you did mention. He's perfect over Belmont. He's 1 for 1. His win coming there over 7 furlongs. I'm rooting for Casa Creed, the old guy, 7 years old, and I would also love to see Caravel in there. So perhaps I'll just bet a trifecta. But Big Invasion with Rosario back in the saddle, I think is going to score.
We move on now to I think the second biggest race on the day, and something we always look forward to, which is the Hillendale Metropolitan Handicap, better known as the Met Mile. And Cody's Wish in here at 7-5. He's the marquee horse in this race, coming off a big win in a 7 furlong race at Churchill Downs. And boy, it looks like he's just working lights out for Bill Mott up at Saratoga on the training track, which you don't get very fast workouts there necessarily. 3 straight bullet workouts, including on June 4th, his latest work for that, in 46-4. Very interesting race. I'm going to go for Repo Rocks, the Jamie Ness miracle that has been a very different horse, as happens with so many horses that come into his barn. Just based on buyer numbers, he's fast enough to win this. Now, is he going to bounce off that 109 in the Westchester? That's the question. But he's thrown in a 109 and a 111 this year, which really puts him as fast, if not a little bit faster than Cody's Wish. I just don't want to keep, I'm no knocks on Cody's Wish, but, I think this is a situation where maybe you want to think a little bit outside the box a little bit, and I'll go with Repo Rocks. And actually, Dr. Scheibel at 10-1, I don't know if he wants to go a mile or not. His career has all been running in shorter races, primarily 6 furlongs, but I think he's in the mix as well. Coming off a big win last time out, has probably had some physical problems as he had a big gap in his form from March 26, 2022 to May of this year. But you can see it was only a 3-horse field, but he beat CZ Rocket in that race, and CZ Rocket is a very good horse. So that's my take on the Met. TD Thornton.
My assessment is Cody's Wish, you can't bet on him. You can't bet against him. He had that big, visually impressive move off the far turn last time out on the on the Derby undercard at Churchill. And when you see those horses making that rocket type of move, it really sticks in your head. But when I went back and parsed the race, he was really the only horse who got first run on 2 tiring long shots, one of whom he'll face back in here again on Saturday. And it's the type of effort that makes me share Bill's mentality of, well, let's think outside the box here. But you go outside the box, who else is there? You to my way of thinking, banking on somebody like a Charge It or a Zandon, 2 horses who were pretty highly rated on the Triple Crown Trail last year and are really still trying to find their best form at age 4. White Barrio, he was in the mix last year too, as far as Triple Crown status. He's making his first start for Richard Dutrow, switching over to a new stable for the Met Mile. And Slow Down Andy, he was briefly on the Triple Crown Trail last year, hasn't started since the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. So this race is kind of a conundrum for me. It's probably a take a pass as far as straight wagering goes, and I think you have to sock in Cody's Wish there as a reluctant single.
It's tough to bet against Cody's Wish. It really is. He's never broke from the 1 hole. I was just scrolling through his PPs. He's broke from the 2 hole and 1. So I think Junior knows him best. In fact, he hasn't got beat on him since he rode him in a maiden race. He's on a 5 or 6 race winning streak with him. So Cody's Wish for the win. As far as Dr. Scheibel is concerned, we're going to show his workout in just a minute, workout of the week. That was a good run in basically a 3-horse, 2-horse race for his tightener. He's going to ship across the country. It's a long way to ship. And I think he'll have no problem actually getting the mile distance. It just depends on what kind of trip he's going to get. He's liable to be close to a pretty hot pace in there, but I certainly can't talk you off of Dr. Scheibel for trainer Mark Latt.
11th race on the card, the Resorts World Casino Manhattan Grade 1, 1.25 miles on the turf. And the NYRA line maker has kind of stepped out a little bit here, making up to the mark, the 8-5 morning line favorite. That surprised me a little bit. I don't think anybody in this race deserves to be 8-5, coming off a win in the Turf Classic last time out at Churchill Downs, but a little bit of a one-race wonder, especially from the buyer standpoint. That was the only time the horse ever broke 100, and it was his first ever stakes win for Rapoli St. Elias stable and Todd Pletcher. When in doubt, a New York turf race, Charles Appleby. He's got 2 in here. He's got Warren Point and Ottoman Fleet. It looks like Ottoman Fleet is the better of the 2. Buick rides him. The other jockey, Richard Mullen, shows up on Warren Point. I mean, everything Charlie Appleby brings over here runs. It looks like the Fort Marcy was used as a prep for this race. The distance shouldn't be any problem. He's coming off a big effort last time out where he got a 102 buyer. I got to go with Charlie Appleby in there. But another interesting race. Red Knight is coming off a win in the Man of War. Michael Maker is always dangerous with these kind of horses. TD?
Yeah, Red Knight, the 9-year-old New York bred, the long grind down from last in the Man of War. That was a pretty impressive race. Can he build off of that one? Tough question, tough task. At the risk of being Captain Obvious here, Ottoman Fleet, one of the 2 Godolphin horses in here. I think that Fort Marcy sets him up nicely for a run on Saturday in the Manhattan. And, I went back and forth on up to the mark in here. I think if you look at his race 2 starts back in the Maker's Mark Mile at Keeneland, a flat mile, maybe not his optimal distance. Strong rally last time out on the Derby undercard going 9 furlongs. And he's just a big, stout-chested horse who looks like he's, that effort suggests he can handle 10 furlongs to me. But again, I'm eating some chalk here. And again, trying to avoid the role of Captain Obvious, but Up to the Mark and Ottoman Fleet. Tough to get by both of those two in the Manhattan for me.
I would argue if both horses weren't already at Belmont Park, if Charlie Appleby was going to run them both, Warren Point and Ottoman Fleet, because is it really fair that jockey Richard Mullen rode Ottoman Fleet in his last start? Now, I know that Bill Buick is the number one rider for Godolphin, but they take Mullen off of a horse he's just won over the track at Belmont Park, rode very well. They put him on Warren Point, and they put Bill Buick on Ottoman Fleet. Is that fair? I mean, am I just going crazy?
But Zoe, isn't it an indication that, again, it's kind of an obvious point to make, that Appleby thinks Ottoman Fleet is much more likely to win than the other one? I mean, Buick is his guy.
I get that. But I mean, at the same point, Charlie is a good guy. Mullen's coming in for the ride. It's not like they're just going to run one horse. So Mullen's there. He just won on the horse. He knows the horse. Buick's been on the horse a couple of times. He's winless on the horse. Why not stick with Mullen? I mean, that's just my point. And looking at Warren Point, didn't get the best of rides from Frankie last time out, was stuck a long way back, was very wide. Everything didn't go his way. So I looked to Warren Point to run a much better race. I'm going to use the pair of them.
And we want to remind you that the TDN Writers Room is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Horse Breeders Association. It's a big upcoming weekend for the Pennsylvania program, with 2 PA breds having big shots on the Belmont weekend. You have Caravel in the Jaipur. We talked about her already. Last year's Breeders' Cup turf sprint winner, and Angel of Empire, who was third in the Kentucky Derby, coming back in the Belmont and is my pick to win the Belmont Stakes this year. And by the way, Caravel was originally slated to go to Ascot, but her connections decided to opt for the Jaipur instead. She won the Intercontinental Stakes on the Belmont weekend last year, and this year the Breeders' Cup champ returns to Belmont weekend to face the boys in the Jaipur. We know that Brad Cox is very high on Angel of Empire. Here's what he had to say going into the race. I think he has more to show. We always thought he would get better with the more he does based on pedigree and his physical, and he has. His numbers in the Kentucky Derby went forward, and he's had 5 weeks to recover from the number. From a physical standpoint, he seems to be continuing to develop, and I've loved what we've seen from him in his work. So that's the take from Brad Cox. And it's going to be a big weekend for Pennsylvania breds, with 2 of their stars going at Belmont Park. And we'll be right back after this message from the Pennsylvania Horse Breeders Association.
The PA Horse Breeders Association presents the Pennsylvania Stallion Series. 6 races for PA sired, PA bred 2-year-olds at parks. 2 $100,000 contests at 5.5 furlongs. On August 21st, PA Day at the races. September 23rd, PA Derby Day has 2 races at 6.5 furlongs, both with a $150,000 purse. And in December, 2 races going long, each worth $200,000. For more, go to pabred.com.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by the Green Group, a tax, accounting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry, designed to save you taxes. And welcome in now the Green Group guest of the week. Very nice of David O'Rourke during one of the busiest weeks of the year for him, of course, Belmont Stakes Week, to join us this week on the TDN Writers Room podcast. David, welcome. And again, thanks for taking some time out of your day. Belmont Stakes Week, a lot to talk about, a new Belmont Park right around the corner, tons to talk about there. But first, I want to have you help us with the overview of the Triple Crown itself. As you well know, there's a lot of people now are saying it's broken, it needs to be fixed. I myself have gone from one camp to the other, and for the first time, I'm on the bandwagon of it's time to change the spacing of the races. Where does NYRA stand on this? Where does David O'Rourke think about that?
The 3 grade 1s for 3-year-olds we're talking about right here. And then the fact that we don't have a pattern committee in the United States. I think I think everything should always be looked at and re-examined, whether it's every year or every 3 years. And I think I believe that a pattern committee would do well for the sport in the United States. And I think it would help in a lot of other areas. The spacing of the Triple Crown, the spacing of other stakes races around the country, and get a more kind of cohesive schedule. Okay. So, it's a conversation that you would always have to be open to, but I think we're just limiting to just these 3 races may be a mistake, where we should possibly take a look at the entire stakes schedule in the U.S. I mean, the fall crop has changed. The dynamics of racing are different than they were 20 years ago. Yeah, I think everything should always be re-examined.
Okay. So is it fair to say you're at least open to the idea then?
To the conversation, of course, you would have to be.
Belmont is in an ideal situation, Dave, with you don't have the quick 2-week turnaround that the Preakness does. You have 3 weeks. So an awful lot of horses will run in the Derby and then come back 5 weeks later and run in the Belmont. So I'm not sure it really affects Belmont Park and NYRA quite as much as perhaps it might do the other tracks. But what would you think about having certain grade ones like every Saturday once a month? Because there could be a fantastic order, like you mentioned, like pattern races where you have it drawn out throughout the country and everybody agrees on the same thing.
I think that would be a very logical thing for our sport here in the U.S. to consider and to at least look at. In terms of the Triple Crown, I mean, there's reasons for the spacing originally. It's a challenge. It's very hard obviously one of the hardest accomplishments in sports. So I wouldn't be the one to opine on it. I don't think I'm qualified in that sense, but I do think everything should be open for discussion. I think that's fair.
You've been with NYRA since 2008. What are some of your fondest memories of the Triple Crown? Because I was there for Justify, I was there for American Pharaoh, and there have been some fabulous losses as well. Do you remember a favorite Triple Crown Belmont race that really, if someone asks you, what are you going to say? What was it going to be?
It was Rags to Riches, and I think that was before I was actually even an employee here, but it would be my first one, and it was just cool. And that was some of the early impressions I had of the sport. So that one always sticks out. And then, of course, to see 2 Triple Crowns, it's amazing. Pharaoh, that's just an experience unto itself. But yeah, Rags to Riches would be the one that would pop in my head first.
Dave, going back maybe 10 years or so ago, right about the time that maybe you started with NYRA, if you didn't have a horse going for the Triple Crown, quite frankly, the Belmont could be a little bit of a dud. And that has changed. You haven't had a horse go for the Triple Crown in the last several years. But something shifted, and with or without a Triple Crown horse, this is a huge day now. It's a huge event. You're going to get a huge audience. You're going to get a lot of enthusiastic people out there. What has caused that shift? What has NYRA frankly done right to make that happen?
I mean, on that one, I'd have to give a lot of credit to Martin Panza when he was here, and he kind of realigned a lot of our stakes and focusing on big days. And Belmont was one of his big concepts to move the Met Mile, for instance. And it's paid off well. It was the right move. It was a risky move to make at the time. And we still applaud it because you're right. It has worked. And it has helped us in the years where you don't have a Triple Crown. And there's so many other races on this card. It's borderline overwhelming.
I guess
3 days, essentially.
I guess I can't convince you to move the Met Mile back to Memorial Day then.
We could leave that to the pattern.
Right. Okay.
So you've just had the entries for basically Belmont Stakes weekend. What one race are you most looking forward to other than the Belmont Stakes? Because there is an absolutely terrific card of racing on Saturday and Friday leading up to it.
I tend to gravitate towards the turf racing. The Gold Cup is always an interesting one for me. It's just different. It's a different style. We don't see much over here. Spenderella, the New York bred coming back in just a game. That's an interesting one. On Thursday, the Wonder again. That was I'd have a better answer, a more educated answer for you, probably Thursday morning, as I can get into these cards. Because right now we're prepping, but it's really kind of soothing. The handicapping the night before is actually one of the things I learned as I got into this business and in this game, and I find it kind of a really cool exercise that's relaxing in a way, as odd as that might sound.
One day at a time. One of the things that I am most looking forward to is hearing Tom Durkin come back to call 4 races on Fox Sports that you've all teamed up with to cover the Belmont Stakes. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it took to bring Tom back in the booth? I gather he's been practicing.
I'd have to give all the credit on Fox. That was their idea. Specifically, I believe Mike Mulvihill over in Fox, I believe, was, and they approached Tom, Tony Alivato, and I don't know how they did it, but I'm really glad they did.
Well,
it's going to be absolutely terrific.
Dave, let's switch gears now and talk about the other big subject, the future of Belmont Park and the Belmont Stakes. Great news for NYRA. You got the state to approve the loan that you've been working on for a couple of years so that we can now move forward and build a new Belmont Park. And frankly, that'll also mean, as we know, the last of Aqueduct. Can you just sort of give us a time schedule, a time frame for what's going to happen when, and what are we going to see over the next year or two?
So right now we're in the master planning / programming phase. And then over the summer, an overview of the plans. We will supply that to the FOB, who is essentially the landlord for our property. And that's when cues on the project will really start to get into the public sphere. Ideally, we'd like to have the project completed for the 2026 Belmont. Now that I'm saying that before we've gone deep into the planning and the staging, but that is our goal entering into the process.
And what does that mean for when you would leave Belmont Park? When would you have to abandon racing at Belmont so that there can be construction, 365 days a year or close to it?
We're set, our understanding right now is that we will be at Aqueduct for the falls going forward. And the real question is, how do we work in the springtime? Turf is a really valuable commodity for our circuit. So I don't have good answers for you that until we get into the professionals, start laying out some timelines. And we'd like to get the project done as quickly as possible. We have to also think about the continuity of our circuit and our horsemen here. So there's a lot of balance that'll be played out. We'll have better answers towards the end of summer.
What's this going to mean for future Belmonts during the construction process?
I'll have that answer in the middle and the end of the summer.
All right, well, let's talk about the physical size of Belmont Park. I believe right now it's almost 29 acres. And it seems like you're going to make it a whole lot smaller, maybe to 6 or 7 acres. How's that going to come?
And you've probably all heard, this building, including the basement, is 1.3 million square feet. It's massive. The building's targeted roughly 275,000 square feet. So you just think about a footprint of 1/5 the size, centered on really where the clubhouse is now. It would be much narrower. And it's going to give us the opportunity to open up lots of green space, as well as the infield. So in terms of the aesthetics of the building, that's TBD. In terms of the property itself, park-like, that's the concepts going in, areas for families and kids. And you could never recreate the backyard at Saratoga. It's unique to itself. But what that has done for racing, at least in my perception, in my 15 years, I can't count how many people that got into this game starting out in that backyard. Now, this is downstate New York, so the market's slightly different, but we're on the edge of New York City, and this will be a beautiful venue with a park-like features that flow through where you see the grandstand that will be opened up, and then it will flow right into the infield. So there's, conceptually, that's where we're going. And I think it's going to be really good for the game, really good for the younger fans, and to work on the next generation.
I think Zoe let you off the hook a little bit too easily on the 2025 Belmont, because that would be the one that obviously would be, to be determined if you follow that time schedule. Could you at least discuss what are the various possibilities? In the 60s, when this new the current Belmont was being built, they raced at Aqueduct. What are at this point, I understand you don't have any firm plans, but you must in your mind or in executive meetings, at least been exploring some possibilities. What might they be?
Well, you're correct on the Aqueduct. There's Saratoga, and then there's Belmont itself. But the likelihood in 25 to actually do that on the property, you'd be looking at something in the infield. I know they did it at Arlington years ago. There's 3 tracks. There's 3 possibilities. Don't have a definitive answer yet. Some of the reaction to that might actually help me steer us in the direction that everybody wants.
Well, not that my vote counts for much, but I say a Belmont at Saratoga would be wild and very interesting.
That might send a benchmark that might be hard to match, because that would be so unique. But yeah, that would be really cool. There's no doubt on that from a fan perspective.
Absolutely. David, another question about the new Belmont Park. Obviously, the grandstand now is something from a very different era when, we used to get 35,000 people on a Saturday. It's great for Belmont Stakes Day, and the rest of the year, it's just obviously way too big. A smaller grandstand, how do you make a building that fits both needs, the Thursday afternoon crowd and the Belmont Stakes crowd when a son of Into Mischief in 2029 is going to try to win the Triple Crown?
As part of the project, a lot of the infrastructure will be set for scaling up, specifically for Belmont Day and Breeders' Cup. That's kind of the large event capacity, and there's programming. There's certain levels of inventory you need for these type of events. Obviously, we're gonna have tons of space. Capacity is not going down. So that's part of the project. Like, what do we need when we scale up, and how do we do that efficiently? Because the more you invest in the front end in that, the more efficient you can deploy it, and it's more cost effective and smoother and a better experience for the fans. For instance, Ascot, the tenting that they have there is actually wonderful. Breeders' Cup does a very good job with it. So we're looking at that and what kind of infrastructure put into the ground so we can scale up for exactly what you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
What will it mean to get the Breeders' Cup back at Belmont?
It'd be huge. It's huge for our horsemen. They haven't been able to run on their home track in quite a long time. So I think it would be good. I think it would be good for the Breeders' Cup. It would be great for New York racing. And, there's one concept that it could be good to bring. It's easier for the Euros to get over here. We're closer, obviously. So I think it would be a great event. And, the building will be winterized, and the weather will be less of a factor. And here, a lot of it was the shadow is part of our issue as you get deep into the fall, and that's obviously going to be calculated into the building. So,
David, that's very interesting. The first time I've heard that, we remember the incident with Dejour jumping the shadow back at Belmont all these years ago. How would that work? How would you fix it that's no longer a factor?
It's actually not too hard because this building's so big, and the overhang over the seating is so huge. I don't think there's any way we would reach that height. But they do shadow studies as we work on the project, and the architects are keyed in on that. And
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really important actually as you start to look at going year round, specifically on the main track.
Another question about the future as we go forward. Right now, you have the 3 tracks in the schedule with Aqueduct, Belmont, and Saratoga has worked out very nicely. Saratoga is as popular as ever. Now that you're going to be down to, or when you are down to the 2 tracks, will it be the same schedule for Saratoga with Belmont filling all the rest of the dates that Aqueduct took up? Or could this lead to an expansion of the Saratoga meet?
Going into this, it would be the former. But that's going into it. And in terms of the characteristics of the meet, we are installing a synthetic at Belmont. So how we run the winter meet in terms of as a synthetic meet, or are we marrying the synthetic with the main track, which would be winterized? These are things that are on the table, and we'll get more clarity as we move forward. But it's a very good question.
What do you see the future of racing with synthetic tracks? Because, we went through this in Southern California. They put them in. They perhaps weren't installed quite the right way and all the same at the different tracks. But it seems like right now in this day and age, a lot of people are leaning more towards synthetic tracks. And I mean, it's great for you guys in New York because of the winter meets.
I mean, there's a lot of tradition with the dirt racing, obviously, in the United States. In terms of, I think with safety, it's you can't compromise. So you go where the data leads you. And now that we have HISA and we have the ability to have uniform rules, now we could just let the data lead us to where we need to be. And if you look at U.S. racing, it's a worldwide sport, and the statistics for the sport are incredible. So we can benchmark ourselves and best practices. And I'm not an expert on tracks. I mean, Glenn Kozak could speak better to this, but I think now that HISA, as of the last week, we have a national regulatory body, And now that's going to allow us to make, I believe it's going to accelerate the process of implementing changes. And these changes, I feel, need to be just data driven. Safety first, period. That's my opinion.
Dave, before we let you go, how good a handicapper are you, and who's going to win the Belmont?
Forte, play defensive, and then I would keep Forte in either exactas and trifectas and put some value underneath. I like Hit Show. I like Red Route 1, Angel of Empire. If I was going to put underneath Forte. Try and get some value onto the ticket.
David O'Rourke, once again, thanks so much for spending some time with us, taking some time out of your busy day. Exciting week for Belmont Park and the future of Belmont Park. We get that new grandstand up in a couple of years. Very great news for New York racing. Thanks again, and have a wonderful Belmont Day.
All right. Thank you for having me.
As the Green Group Guest of the Week, David O'Rourke will receive a free 1-hour free tax consultation with the Green Group. For more information on how the Green Group can save you taxes, visit greenco.com. We'll be right back after this message from the Green Group.
Are you paying too much in taxes? The Green Group can help. There's a reason the most successful owners, breeders, and horsemen select the Green Group as their tax advisors. They save you money and share successful strategies. Over the past 40 years, the Green Group founder, Len Green, has owned and bred some of the best racehorses in the history of the sport, like Eclipse Award-winning champions Jaywalk and Wonder Wheel. His DJ stable competes at the highest level and has received the game's most prestigious honors. Len Green's in-depth, hands-on industry knowledge, combined with cutting-edge tax-saving strategies, has produced positive results for his clientele and has made the Green Group the top-rated accounting and tax firm in the thoroughbred business. For a confidential and complimentary consultation, contact us at 732-634-5100 or visit our website at www.greenco.com. The Green Group, proven strategies to save you taxes.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by XBTV. The XBTV Work of the Week is Dr. Scheibel, who will be running in the Met Mile this coming weekend, draws post position number 3. He went 6 furlongs on Saturday in 113 flat for trainer Mark Glatt. On the inside of him is the maiden and Big Baby. And just take a look at Dr. Scheibel. If you have concerns that he won't be able to get a mile distance, take a look again. This is a very, very good work with a strong gallop out for the son of Violence, who was a Grade 1 winner at 2 and also a Grade 1 winner at 3. This year at 5, he was third in the Grade 1 Dubai Golden Shaheen and won an allowance race last time out. And guys, I'm going to step out. I am out of here. I've got to run. I will see you next week. TD, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Good luck.
Happy Belmont Day, Zoe.
Thanks, guys.
Well, TD, let's dive in now to the other big story that has dominated racing, not just last week, but throughout the Triple Crown campaign. It's obviously the problems at Churchill Downs with the 12 breakdowns and the fatalities. And in some of the words covers that I've done in the TDN, I've used the word crisis. And I don't think that's hyperbole or an exaggeration. Is indeed a crisis. But the big story last week was the announcement by Churchill Downs that they're suspending racing at Churchill as of this weekend and are moving it to Ellis Park. And I got to be honest, at first, I really thought this was a bad idea for a number of reasons. One of which was, if you're going to continue to train at Churchill, how can you send out the message that perhaps the track is unsafe, or we're worried enough about the track that we're going to move it racing to to Ellis Park. And also the idea that they ran last weekend at Churchill. So they say, okay, we're moving to Ellis Park. And also I thought that maybe it didn't send the right message, that, maybe the message was to say, continue to say, we're confident that the track is fine, and to kind of just ride out the storm. But as the story developed, I started to think more about, I think they did the right thing, Because, I mean, obviously, this is about optics and about public relations. And some people will scoff at that and say, that's not what you should be most worried about. I tell you what, you should be worried about that. Horse racing needs to send the message to its critics and to the public at large that they are doing everything possible. And this was a move on Churchill's part to say, hey, we're going to do everything we can, and we're going to turn over every rock, and we're going to take every step possible. And, that it's now become cliche, but an abundance of caution. So I get it. I understand why they did it. And of course, now we're just going to keep our fingers crossed that everything is run safely at Ellis Park.
Well, I think you're right in that it's a crisis. I mean, anytime 12 horses lose their lives, that can be termed a crisis. I think you're right that it's about optics. But the question for me when I try and get my head around this is, whose optics are we talking about here? The optics for the greater good of the sport, or the corporate optics for Churchill Downs Incorporated? Now, remember, everybody watching this podcast and everybody involved in our little corner of the world, this is a racing and a horse health issue. And like it or not, a large gaming corporation, a publicly traded gaming corporation like Churchill Downs, they also have some other aspects to consider here. And Churchill Downs, like almost every other major corporation in America, they have a risk management vice president. It's a person who's pretty high up on their masthead, and that person's job, and presumably his team, are to swat back any type of things that could hurt the brand, could hurt the stock price. And I think it would be naive to think, I think while we all want horse health and safety to be centric and at the fore of the argument, I think it would be naive to think that there aren't some other things going into the equation at the corporate level at Churchill Downs. We don't, we have to take them at their word, because Churchill Downs as a corporation speaks largely through press releases and statements. We don't get a lot of back and forth. We're certainly not going to get a back and forth interview, I don't think, with their vice president of risk management. And when you look at how they arrived at this decision, they had last week a veterinary summit at their track that lasted over a couple of days. They made a couple of recommendations, which seemed to be smart recommendations, that they announced on Thursday. Then all of a sudden on Friday, the script was flipped. It was all of a sudden, we're going out to Ellis Park. Late on Friday, I talked to Mick Peterson, who's the director of the Racing Surfaces Testing Laboratory in Lexington, Kentucky. He's one of the foremost experts on track safety. They also brought in another independent expert, Dennis Moore. Both of those gentlemen said, we can't find anything. Mick Peterson went over the Churchill surface before the meet and after the Derby. Dennis Moore had been there for a few days last week. I'm not sure if he's still there continuing his work. Horsemen in general did not have complaints about the surface. And now all of a sudden we're going to up and move a couple of 100 miles out to the western part of the state to a track that has been dormant since last summer. Mick Peterson said that it's routine for his team to go in and do pre-meet assessments at various tracks, and Ellis Park is one of them. They had that assessment scheduled, but they expedited it. But at some point overnight from last Thursday into Friday, the decision got made to switch everything out to Ellis. And, is there not, so that's going to quell the public perception risk at the corporate level for Churchill Downs. But are there not risks in moving the racing away from a track where you've had experts vet it out and say it's okay, the horsemen aren't complaining? Now we're going to go out and, while we're still training over the Churchill surface, race at Ellis Park, which hasn't hosted a meet for, whatever it is, 8 or 9 months since last summer. And Mick Peterson's team hadn't been able to evaluate the track prior to that. I presume they're doing that now, or they have done it already. But there is a risk in doing that as well. And I think that's one of the things you have to consider.
And to your point, somebody pointed out to me that the press release came out 5 o'clock on Friday. Now think of the timing. That's half an hour after the stock market closes on Friday afternoon, and then there's not going to be any stock activity till the following Monday. And we know, that Churchill Downs, obviously the stock price is very, very important to them. Didi, another thing that kind of went unexplained in this was the role of HISA in this. Earlier in the week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, Lisa Lazarus met with the media on a Zoom call. And she was asked point blank, do you think that they should shut down the meet or hit the pause button or whatnot? And her answer was no, for a lot of the reasons you just said, because the horsemen and the experts are telling us that the track is fine. So if the track is fine, we're not going to recommend that we shut the meet down. Or, nobody had even thought of the Ellis Park thing at that point. Then when the press releases come, press releases were flying last Friday, and including one from HISA, and there was a total 180 there. They now said we recommended to Churchill Downs that they do this. Now, they can't force Churchill to shut down the meet. They could take away their simulcasting signal, but they have no authority to shut down a meet. So what happened there? And I don't know the answer, but and what happened there, and how much pressure did HISA maybe put on Churchill to do this?
I don't know the answer either. I didn't report on that, so I don't have any insights other than what you just said there. But let's face it, Churchill Downs Incorporated, as a gaming company that controls 5 tracks, thoroughbred tracks in this country, a lot of entities and racing commissions and committees recommend things to them, and they don't follow them. A lot of people recommended don't sell Arlington Park, and the corporation calls their own shots. So I don't know how that HISA recommendation came through the pipeline, or if it did come through the pipeline, or how the message got shifted. But at the end, Churchill Downs Incorporated is going to have to live with the decision one way or the other. They're the ones that make the call. So they can't, I don't think it would be genuine for them to say, well, they were forced or coaxed or nudged into this decision. It's up to them eventually.
Again, let's just keep our fingers crossed. The last thing we need is now to have any problems at Ellis Park. If they can get through the Churchill at Ellis portion of the meet without any fatalities, that would go a long way to just, quieting down the whole situation. So that's obviously what they're rooting for. TD, another thing that's come up, and I've been on a soapbox. I followed up with what Earl Mack wrote in the TDN, which I thought was a just extremely well done piece about, no more just talking about it. It's obvious that synthetic tracks are safer. And we're in a crisis mode now, and we need to tell the public that we are doing everything possible to keep these horses as safe as can be. And if you're going to do that, don't you have to go to synthetic tracks? It's a controversial subject. I agreed with Earl Mack. I wrote a kind of a follow-up to his column. And the statistics don't lie. In 2022, horses were 3.5 times more likely to die in a dirt race than they were in a synthetic surface race. So if we're going to look everybody in the eye, our critics, the public at large, and tell them that we're doing everything we can, then don't we have to at least begin to look at this situation? I know it's drastic. I know it would cause tremendous upheaval in the stallion market, but, this sport, we need it to be here 50 years from now. And, for the first time in as long as I've been involved in racing, I'm not sure we can say that it is going to be here 50 years from now, or even it's going to be here 25 years from now. So I don't think there's any half measures here. Let's do everything in our power. Therefore, I'm among those that are advocating, as drastic and draconian as a step as it may be, dirt racing has to end in this country and has to be replaced by synthetic surface racing.
And one thing to that point is, if people look back at, the technology advances so much. We're already one generation removed from when, 20 years ago, when California mandated in synthetic tracks at all of its major racetracks. The composition and the maintenance and the upkeep of synthetic tracks in that era, that was the first iteration, more or less. I know Turfway Park had tried it a little bit before then, and they had synthetic at other venues as well. But that California experiment was the first iteration really on a larger scale. And the first iteration of anything is rarely the one that sticks. Other people, you have to fail a little bit for things to get better. So I think the composition of the synthetics and what we know about them and what we understand about them has evolved in leaps and bounds. So if you're going to use what happened in California as your benchmark and say, well, we went through this and we had to switch back to dirt, that's probably not a great comparison. You have to think that there is going to be some advancement in it. On the other side of the argument is, I don't think you ever want to be making, it's a crisis point right now. And I don't know if crises are the best time to be making these types of decisions. We see that NYRA is going to be installing the synthetic track at Belmont, and Gulfstream recently installed a synthetic track. They didn't have to make those decisions under duress. And I think that's when the best decisions are made, when you're not faced with an immediate crisis and what do we have to do? And it should be all for what is best about the horse, not what is best about public relations and public perception. So I think that we do have to take a hard look at it and keep in mind that things have changed, and they've changed technologically for the better, and they've changed for what is acceptable for doing business out there.
I mean, this is one of those hot button issues that brings out passionate arguments from both sides, and I'm going to try to simplify it to a point that I think everybody can understand, and I don't see how people can disagree with me. If we were to convert to synthetic surface races, we would save the lives of hundreds of horses a year. So please, can somebody, I'm not asking you, TD, but can the people that say you're wrong about synthetic surfaces, how do they respond to that? I don't know what possibly their answer can be. Again, we go to synthetic surfaces, we save the lives of hundreds of horses a year. How is that a bad idea? Again, you're not a synthetic critic, so but I shake my head when that point doesn't seem to resonate with people, or some people anyways.
Well said.
The TDN Stallion of the Week is Honor AP. The son of Honor Code won the Grade 1 Santa Anita Derby as a 3-year-old, defeating an eventual Horse of the Year Authentic. His first yearlings will hit the sales ring this summer, and he stands for $15,000 this year at Lane's End. Why don't you check out Honor AP, this week's Stallion of the Week, brought to you by Lane's End.
Honor AP, a mesmerizing horse from the very beginning, who captured the imagination of the racing world and proved his potential on the track. A Grade 1 winner, out of a multiple Grade 1 winner, with incomparable looks and an unbeatable pedigree. The speed, the bloodline, the physical. Honor AP. Only at Lane's End.
All the thrills. Fraction of the bills. Experience the power of the partnership. Change your life, make new friends, and compete at the highest level of thoroughbred racing. West Point Thoroughbreds, the gold standard in racing partnerships. Visit westpointtb.com.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by West Point Thoroughbreds. Joining a West Point partnership can launch you into the winner's circle and give you instant camaraderie with your fellow owners. One West Point horse to look out for this week is Christophe Clement. He has Parnack running at Belmont on Thursday. She was unplaced in her last 2 starts against Stakes Company, but won her last start at Belmont last October. Good luck to all her connections on a big weekend at Belmont. Are you interested in joining a West Point partnership? Just visit West Point TV and click on available horses. Well, that's a wrap for this week's TDN Writers Room. I want to especially thank TD Thornton for filling in this week. Randy Moss couldn't make it. So thanks again to TD and Zoe Cabin. Thanks to our co-producers, Katie Petroniak and Anthony LaRocca. Our editors, Aaliyah LaRocca and Nathan Wilkinson. Have a great Belmont Stakes weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.